Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we discuss if the NBA's new rule will prevent Joel Embiid from winning his second straight MVP. We're having this conversation today because just a few nights ago, Joel Embiid absolutely torched the San Antonio Spurs. He had a 70-point game, and he increased his scoring average from that game from a 35 points per game to 36 points per game. He is truly having a historic NBA season. However, even though he is having a historic NBA season, there is still a possibility that if Joel Embiid misses 7 more games this season, actually, I think it's 8 more games this season, that he will not be eligible to win MVP. The reason is because the NBA came out with this new rule to start this season. And basically, they said if you want to be eligible for postseason awards and you like MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, All NBA honors, you have to play in 65 or more games. And that is like 80% of the season, just to kind of average that math out. So we do. So basically, NBA is like, hey, we do kind of factor in like, hey, if you do, miss a month of the season, because 17 games is like a month and like a week. It's like 5 or 6 weeks of the season. So you can have like a 4 to 5 or 4 to 6 week injury, and you could still, make all NBA honors. Um, with that being said, though, Joel Embiid right now is not on pace to get that 65 game mark. He's missed 10 games already this season. And if he misses 8 more games, he is out. He can only miss 7 more games. And right now, he's just not on pace to do that. Right now, he's on pace to get 62 games. Um, so I want to talk about kind of like, just the facts of, if the rule is right here in a minute. But I kind of want to, before we get to that, I want to talk about why the NBA implemented this rule. Um, the reason they implemented this rule is because the NBA has had in the regular season, has had a huge players resting. I don't know if you want to call it epidemic, problem, trend, but players have just been sitting out a lot more often in the regular season. They've been saying that like they need rest. They're sitting out with sore knees, and these are things that players just really wouldn't do in the past. And it's kind of gotten a problem where players are missing out on, major national TV games. And it's one thing if players are injured, to miss games, and it's one thing too if overall it's like, hey, I think NBA fans, as someone that's an NBA fan like myself, I think NBA fans would admit this. Hey, we'll sacrifice the Tuesday night TNT game or the Thursday night TNT game or the Sunday ESPN game of like LeBron James sitting out if we have him 100% healthy, or Kevin Durant or Kawhi Leonard or whoever, if we have him 100% healthy come April, May, June. However, though, guys, if you're also an NBA fan, it seems like every year in the playoffs, everyone is still beaten up. Like, it seems like every year in the playoffs, there's still injuries, and guys are fighting through injuries, and guys are re-injuring stuff. And it's like the load management thing truly isn't working. Now, take what you want out of this study. The NBA basically did a comprehensive study over the last 40 years. They started in the 1980s and they went all the way to present day. And they're basically like, hey, is there any correlation to guys missing games and, preventing injuries? Are we seeing guys in today's NBA, the fact that we have implemented this load management and all this rest stuff, are these guys actually missing more game or missing less games and being healthier because they're doing load management? And the NBA concluded that no, there's actually no evidence behind this. This is this interesting stat that I saw. So everybody from the 80s to the current day, and basically they went to guys that had all NBA honors, and they went to the amount of games that they missed per season. So this is an average. In the 1980s, those type of players missed 10.4 games per season. Okay. In the 90s, that ticked up ever so slightly to 10.6. 2000s, 13.9. Okay, so we're starting to see that go up a little bit more. In the 2010s, people that were making all NBA teams missed 17.4 games a year. That's 7 more than the 1980s. And so far this decade, players that are making all NBA teams have missed, on average, 23.9 games per year. Remember too, guys, the 2021 season was shortened because of the COVID thing. So we had a shortened season, and we have 23.9, like 7 more than we did a decade ago. More than double than we had in the 1990s. Like, this is insane. Like, this is really getting out of hand. Now all of that isn't 100% load management, but again, we're starting to see here with all of the new technology that we have with players resting, this stuff really there isn't any evidence that we're seeing, guys, actually like that this thing is actually being beneficial. We're not seeing anything where there's any benefits of it. It's one thing, like, I think we're all on page here. If it's like, if we see benefits of this, that it's okay to do it. I think we all understand that, but we're not seeing any benefits here. Because again, too, guys, go back to the last few postseasons, and even think about when we get to this postseason. Ask yourself, like, is everyone healthy? Is everyone healthy? And probably the answer is no. Not everyone's healthy. Now, again, there's freak things that happen all the time. It's basketball. You have a bunch of really tall, long, athletic people jumping up very high in the air and falling down awkwardly a lot of times. I think sometimes we have a lot more like low top shoes now. So I think we actually have more sprained ankles than we usually do, than we have in the past. But basically, that is part of the reason of why the NBA is doing this. Is there's basically look back at the evidence and they're like, hey, like, we don't have any evidence that backs that stuff up, and we need you guys to play games because you guys are our partners. And again, they did collectively bargain over this. Um, Now, with that being said, though, bringing it back to Joel Embiid and kind of like, is this rule right? Because when I first saw the rule, honestly, um, I was okay with it. I was okay with that. I was like, that seems fair. You're playing 80% of the season. Well, basically the rule allows you to, like, if you have like one like minor injury, you can skip a few weeks for that. Or if you have a few ticky tack things here and there, if you want to have a few rest games, you can. Like, it kind of factors all that stuff in. So I was completely fine with that. Now there are different kind of people that, have different takes on this rule. And I've heard a few things like that. I would honestly be fine if they even made it like 60 games. If they made it 60 games, I think that would be fair, because I think the lowest amount of games that someone won the MVP, um, I believe it was Bill Walton in like the late, I think it was 77 or 78. I can't remember the exact year. And he played like 58 games. And in those 58 games, he was an absolute, like without a doubt, like the best player in the NBA. And he was on the best team in the NBA that was just far and above everyone else. So that one made like the most sense. Like, hey, you only, and I mean, it was credit to Bill Walton, the fact that he played 58 games and they still gave him the MVP. Um, so I'd be fine if it was something like that. I've also heard people talk about potentially having it be some sort of a minutes threshold, where it's like it's not fair if like some people are like playing 38 minutes a game and they're playing 65 games, and there's other people that are, let's say, playing 28 minutes a game and they're playing 65 games. Like, that's like, how many more minutes is that? How much more of a workload is that for the guy that's playing 38 minutes a game versus the guy that's playing 28 minutes a game? So I've heard that argument, and I kind of like that argument too. Um, with that being said, though, too, here, guys, and there's another factor I have here too. Could somebody like Joel Embiid actually be benefiting, not necessarily from like the overall health standpoint of, sitting out games and he's going to be healthier for the end of the regular season? Not necessarily like that, but could the fact that he is not playing in some of these games, he just has a little bit more juice, a little bit more energy when he actually does get out onto the court, and he's actually able to like have a little bit more juice than his competition and just dominate a little better? I don't necessarily believe that, but if you did want to make that argument, you could point back to the Kyrie Irving season when he was in Brooklyn, where he couldn't play in Brooklyn. He only played road games because he wasn't vaccinated. So when that happened, he basically would only play road games, and then be playing like once a week, and then we'd come and play like once a week. He'd just drop like 30 and just be like spectacular. And it's like, okay, is that because you're having this all-time great season, or are you playing against guys that are playing 3 times a week and you're only playing 1 time a week? So you're actually able to like prepare your body a little bit more. To the other point here too, to the point of like, should the NBA just like reduce the amount of games in the season, which is a thing that people have been talking about for a very long time, that 82 games is way too long, that they need to reduce the number of games in the season. And and then this will kind of like this load management problem will kind of work itself out. Part of me doesn't believe that, because the logic of load management is basically the best logic I've heard for it is like, hey, you obviously you don't play in games, so just because you're not playing in games means you're not going to be injured. And it's like, yeah, of course, if you're not in the game, you're not likely to be injured. Like, that makes sense. And basically my fear would be if they, let's say they reduced it down to 70. um if they did that, all of a sudden, instead of guys only playing in 60 games, they all of a sudden it's down to 50, and you really just didn't solve the problem. The reason that they won't move it down to 70 is because they will lose money. And again, this is a business. And not just the owners will lose money, the players will also lose money, because again, the players and owners are partners with each other. So again, they're going to lose money if they reduce the amount of games that they should be played. Um, to the grander picture of this thing, though, the 65 game rule. If Joel Embiid keeps going on this season and he's going to finish, let's say, with 35 points per game, 36 points per game is what he's at now. The Sixers win like 53 games or something, and Joel Embiid only plays like 61 games. I think this might be the last year that they have this rule. And again, I don't know if because again, this is seriously what Embiid is doing this year is seriously like it is a historic basketball season. Like, he is literally like he's making his case for best player in the NBA right now. He's averaging 36, 11.6, and about 6 rebounds, 2 blocks a game. I think too, Karl Anthony Towns has made the case of like, hey, like, I'm the best shooting big man of all time. And maybe the numbers could kind of prove that out in a way. But honestly, if you're just talking about shooting ability and ability to score consistently, I think Embiid is like by far the best shooter in NBA history too, because you're talking about like a guy that is on an MVP level, a guy that can get it done. I mean, he hasn't gotten it done at the highest level in the postseason, but he has won a few playoff series, and I think maybe one day he can get there. Maybe it might be this year, but just his sheer scoring ability. If you watch the Sixers enough, there's some nights where he knows that he has like an advantage, and he's like, oh, I know that no one on this other team's going to stop me. I'm just going to go and I'm gonna get mine. I'm gonna dominate down low. He has that like jab step that he has. It's just he's such a smooth jumper. If you foul him late in games, unlike Shaq, who like they had to take Shaq out of games late because he couldn't hit free throws, you don't have to worry about with that within Joel Embiid. If anything, you can just like you want Joel Embiid to be the guy shooting free throws at the end of the game. But I think either they're just going to get rid of the rule entirely after this year if he doesn't hit that threshold, or they're going to either change it to some sort of minute rule, or they're going to change it down to like 60 games. If they made it 60 games, I would be okay with that. I'd be okay with that. Because then it's like, hey, you didn't play in 75% of the season. If you don't play in 75% of the season, then sorry, we don't care. We don't care. And even the greater impact of this too is because a few years ago, the NBA decided to basically intertwine max contracts, and they tried to create, in a way it's kind of backfired, because the idea was like, hey, if you hit this certain threshold of like all NBA honors or whatever, you get to be eligible for this supermax. And that's what guys that we've seen like Damian Lillard sign. We saw Bradley Beal sign that. We saw Russell Westbrook sign that. We saw Giannis recently sign that. We've seen Jokic sign that. We've seen a lot of players like sign those contracts. The reason I said it backfired is like Bradley Beal signs the contract, and then it's like a year later, he's like, yeah, you should trade me. Damian Lillard signs the contract, and he's like, yeah, you should trade me now. Because the thing was, if he would have gotten traded, he wouldn't have been eligible for it. So in a way, it's kind of backfired, because the idea was like, oh, well, these guys will want to stay in these, in these places where they were drafted, because then they can, we'll give them more money as an incentive to do that. And in a way, it's just like they sign the contract and they just ask for the trade after. So it really hasn't like really changed anything on that front. But because of this new rule, let's say if this thing happens, this rule's in place like 5 years. Um, you could see guys like really like losing out on money after a while. Or you could see guys being eligible for these supermax contracts that you could argue don't deserve it. Um, there was 5 players last year that if we had the 65 game rule would not have been eligible. It was Giannis, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Jimmy Butler, and Damian Lillard. The reason that's significant is because if all of those guys in this new rule wouldn't have made that threshold, Pascal Siakam would have made an All NBA team. And Pascal Siakam this year, this offseason, or excuse me, after he would have hit that All NBA threshold, he would have been eligible for a Supermax, which would have given him like, significantly more money than he is going to get if he, we think he's going to re-sign with Indiana now. But when he eventually like re-signs with Indiana or signs somewhere else, like he's not eligible for that, big contract. Now you could say in a way that's a benefit of Indiana because now they have a little bit more salary cap flexibility. Maybe they could even, give him lower than the max versus like if he's eligible for the super max, he's not settling for anything less probably. But with that being said, I do think if Embiid keeps up on this pace and he plays like 62 games, 61 games, 63 games, and he doesn't get the MVP, there's going to be riots. And I think they are justified because he is having a historic season. And it's one thing, too, if it was like last year and that happened, where it's like actually Jokic's season last year. Honestly, if we look back at those numbers, you can make a really strong argument it's better than Embiid's season last year. But you could also make the argument that this Embiid season is better than any Jokic season. Because if you look back at that Jokic season last year, that dude shot 60% from the field. He was, and the people that call him a stat stuffer are just idiots. Because if he was a staff stuffer, he averaged 9.8 assists last year. If he was a stat stuffer, he easily could have bumped that up to 10 points and gotten that as a triple-double, and averaged a triple-double. But he's not a stat stuffer. He doesn't care about that stuff. If he was a stat stuffer, his stats wouldn't be as, the way that they are this year, where they are kind of down. But he's still playing incredibly well because I think Denver's more on cruise control this regular season and they crank it up when they want to. Like last week when they beat Boston, we're the first team to beat Boston at Boston. I think they really cranked it up there. Another person, too, just speaking of Denver real quick, that could be affected by the All-NBA thing is Jamal Murray, even though I don't think he was going to make All-NBA, but he's already missed like 14 games. So that affects him. But there you have it, guys. That basically kind of concludes my argument here. Let me know in the comments. Do you think this rule is correct? Do you think it needs to be, tweaked in a way? Do you think it just needs to be thrown away altogether? Just let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. If you got to this point, if you got to this point, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out in the algorithm. Hit that like button on this video. We've been doing this show for over 4 years now. I only did audio for the first like 3.5 years, and over the last 2 months, we've started putting stuff on YouTube. So if you hit subscribe, it really helps us out in the algorithm. Go ahead and check out previous videos. I've been doing a lot of NBA stuff recently, a lot of different NBA talk. So make sure you check all of that stuff out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.